As this is St David's Day, Dydd Dewi Sant, then we're going to cover a couple of the Celtic constellations themselves. The Celts basically have kept much of the same constellations with a few adages, like the Pleiades here, for instance, was Tudorus Arthur, Telyn Arthur, this, that, and the other Arthur. Everything has been associated with Arthur in the past, and that was a separate entity to Taurus itself. But the entire night sky, as we would see it tonight, is actually all to do with this guy and his dog. And it's a tale that's found in the Mabinogion. I'll get rid of this now. Excuse me. In the Mabinogion, it's known as the tale of Celwch and Olwyn. Celwch was one of Arthur's knights, which is why Arthur features quite a lot within the Mabinogi. Apparently the guy was Welsh. Yes, I know he was allegedly conceived in Tintagel and this, that, and the other, but it doesn't really matter. No one even knows if he existed. But the tales are there from ancient Britain, and they were told and retold and retold and retold, and I'm telling them, here we are again. So Celwch was one of the knights, and he had fallen in love, excuse me, with the beautiful maiden Olwyn. And her father, the giant Ynysbyddaden, didn't like suitors for his daughter for the simple reason that, well, there was an ancient prophecy about Ynysbyddaden that the night his daughter got married, then he would drop dead. So obviously he didn't want to die, and every suitor that came along for his beautiful daughter, he generally gave them tasks that, well, destroyed them, and therefore the problem went away. Now, he heard from the Tylwytheg, or the fairy folk, in a dream that Celwch would be the one to conquer all. And he didn't want this at all, so he tried every way. And when he knew that Celwch and his band were on their way to him, he had his sheep. Of course, in Wales, we're very famous for sheep, but he collected them all together to bar the way. And over hill and dale, as far as the eye could see, there was nothing but sheep, and the men were finding it very difficult to move through it. Until eventually, Ynysbyddaden's disenfranchised brother took pity upon him, and he wanted to gain some of the riches that Ynysbyddaden had obviously robbed from him in the past. And so he used his own ram, and here it is in the sky up here, Aries, to pull the sheep away. And of course they went off following the leader and left Celwch a clear pathway to the castle. Well, when Ynysbyddaden saw him come in, and he knew that, you know, there was nothing he could do to stop him, apart from give him now an impossible task to do. And so Celwch wanted the hand of Olwyn, and Ynysbyddaden said, "You can have her as long as you bring me the great boar of heaven." And well, he didn't know what to do about this, so he took counsel with his men. They said, "Yeah, come on, we can do this kind of thing. We'll find out how to do it." So what they did is they went to the Salmon of Wisdom, and here they are as the constellation of Pisces in the sky. Why salmon? Well, salmon are born in a particular river, and then they swim out to sea after maturing, and they stay there for years, and then they come back to the same river that they were born in. How do they know? Any river is just as good as another, surely, but they come back to the exact same place. So ancient people watching this thought that salmon had a form of wisdom that you know, has obviously been lost. The salmon knew where the boar was. It's up in the sky, but they said the only way in which you're going to catch it is to get Mabon and his dog Drydwyn. Now Mabon is being held in Gloucester at the moment. He was fated by the witches of Gloucester, but unfortunately they got him drunk and then kept him for all kinds of purposes. So he has to be freed. So Celwch and his band went down the Severn following the salmon until they come to the little castle in which Mabon was imprisoned. They freed Mabon after killing the witches, and Mabon said, "Well, my place is not here with you. It's up there in the sky, and I've been neglecting my duties so long." He said, "Well, look, you can go back to the sky. It's not a problem. But will you help me get the great boar of heaven?" And Mabon said, yes, of course I will help. You have done me a favour, I'll do you one as well. But we need my hunting dog, Dridwin, and he is up in North Wales, where he lives in the crags of Cadair Idris. So they travelled across Wales, came to Cadair Idris, and Mabon called the dog, and here he is here, his faithful hound. And why he needed Dridwin was quite simple. Dridwin was the only one that was swift enough and could climb up into the sky and actually catch the boar. Now, the boar itself is in the sky, and it'll be rising shortly after about 7 or 8 o'clock. Okay, here it is here. We don't have lions in Wales, so this was actually a big pig, the boar of heaven, okay? And to be honest, I think you'd rather come across a lion than a boar, because a lion would probably run away from you, whereas a boar, they can be nasty things and they charge. So there it is up there in the sky. Well, Mabon and his hunting dog went up into the sky. They chased the boar of heaven out of the sky, and down it came, landing on the crags of the Elm Valley, and its hooves have cleft particular holes in the rocks there. And then they chased it southward until they came to Forest Fawr in Brecon, and they chased it across the flat tops, across all the moorland, and they finally cornered it and caught it in a place called Cwmturch, the Valley of the Boar, still named that today. They bound it up, brought it back to Ynysbyddaden in triumph, and of course Ynysbyddaden was dismayed to see that Culhwch and his band was still alive and the boar was a captive. Mabon was released and he went to the sky, and he let his hunting dog come up there with him as well. So they've commemorated here in the sky. Well, Ynysbyddaden allowed the marriage to go forward, and of course that night he dropped dead. Culhwch and Olwyn received all his riches. They give part of it to the disenfranchised uncle, and everyone lived happily ever after. But in a dream that night, the Tylwyth Teg visited Culhwch and told him to release the boar. And so the next morning he did so, and upon doing it, it leapt up into the sky to become the constellation here. So ancient Celts would have sort of told this tale to each other time after time, and then tied all the constellations together in so many different ways. And that's how ancient people began to look at the sky, populating it with their gods, their heroes, their demons, the things that mattered to them, and weaving tales about them, because the tales are equally as important as what they could see. They didn't know what the stars were, they didn't know what the planets were, they could follow their movement and interpret them in whichever ways that they saw fit. But it's a case of the stories are the ones that eventually come down to people, and most of our ancient stories come from the sky. Greek myths, Welsh myths, all sorts of legends from every corner of the earth, and they're all to do with what we can see up there, because the biggest gods are all up there in the sky, aren't they? Now, if you're looking tonight and you go up from the belt, you come to the Eye of the Bull, Aldebaran, and there are two orangey star-like objects here. One is definitely a star. The other one is the planet Mars. And there it is, just lying below the Pleiades. So if you've got a camera and you can put it on a tripod, you can take a nice photograph of them, exposing for about 5 or 6 seconds, and you should be able to get a pretty acceptable picture of the Pleiades and Mars together. Now, all these things are in fact tied together in all sorts of weird ways, because if I come out a little bit here, rising over here much later in the night will be this guy here. This is Hugh Gadon, or Bootes, Hugh Gadon to the Welsh. And he was, as you can see, holding a sickle, but in Welsh mythology, his arm is extended and he's holding the tail, not of the bear, but it's actually the handle of the 7 stars here, which we call the plough. And the reason is because Hugh Gadon was the first person to ever put a plough to a oxen or a bull. And at this time of night, what you'll find around midnight is that Hugh is rising, the plough is standing up, and then the reins or the traces of it go over the shoulders of the bondsman, here with his little stick, onto the shoulders of Taurus the bull. And if I play it forward a little bit, then you'll see that as Taurus descends in the west, then Hugh Gadon rises in the east. And because it's the beginning of March, and this is what the sky looks like at midnight, then it was an ancient calendrical form of agricultural sort of reminder, really, so that when the bull was going down and he was rising, the plough is high in the sky and it's time to plough the fields and plant the seeds, and then you would harvest them later in the year, when in fact the roles are reversed, when Hugh goes down in the west and Taurus rises again in the east. So ancient sky watchers obviously used the sky for agricultural purposes, and here we are still remembering them today in this line across the sky on March the 1st. And there it is, easy to see much later on. Now, if we come in a little bit, we have constellation here of Gemini, the twins, okay? Two very bright stars, Castor, Pollux here, and then you can see that they are just two lines of stars really, marking the legs as well if you really want to, but definitely you can see two bright lines of stars marked at the ends of these two very bright stars here, Castor and Pollux, both first magnitude. The boys look a bit strange here because actually they're holding each other's shoulders and dancing in a typical Greek fashion. And in ancient Greek mythology, they were dancing in front of Laodon, the dragon that guarded the garden of the Hesperides and the golden apples and the golden fleece that was there. In fact, they're dancing to distract the dragon while Jason nicks the golden fleece and Hercules beats the dragon to death with a club. And the poor dragon is in fact up there in the sky. And here he is, just there, you can see him. In fact, on Dydd Dewi Sant, we should talk about dragons, shouldn't we, really? Draco the dragon in the sky, as you can see here, is upside down. The Welsh dragon, of course, has got big wings. This one hasn't. It's a typical sort of old Greek sort of come Asian type. But most people are unaware of where the dragon comes from. And most of you may know that it's the dragon of Cadwallader on the flag of Wales, but where did that come from anyway? Well, Cadwallader was building a big castle up in North Wales, and every night the castle shook with an earthquake and the whole thing fell down. And he was frustrated at this, and his engineers didn't know what was happening. His wise men didn't know what was happening, but they said, well, we know of a wise man that could well know what's going on, so we'll bring him to you. And they come down to South Wales and found Merlin, the magician. He was a young boy at the time, and they brought him up to Cadwallader. And Cadwallader said, well, I believe that you know what's happening with my castle. And he said, yes. What you need to do is dig away the top of the mountain, get rid of the foundations, take the top of the hill off, and underneath you'll see what the problem is. And when they did that, they come across two sleeping dragons, a white one and a red one. And Merlin said, now come sunset, they'll wake up and they'll start fighting, and that's what's been shaking the mountain and destroying your castle. But now stand back, the top of the hill isn't trapping them anymore, so let's see what happens. And so the both of them started fighting each other, the white one biting and the red one defending, but eventually the red one got in and was able to destroy the white one, and the white one fell into the cave and just lay there. The red one flew off into the sky to become one of the Tylwyth Teg, or the fairy folk, and is commemorated by the Celts in this constellation here. Well, Cadwallader went to Merlin and said, you know, well, what do I do now? He said, well, you can build your castle, just fill in the cave, leave the white dragon in it, it's dead, it's not going to do you any harm, and you can carry on. And so Cadwallader said, well, what do I owe you? And Merlin said, nothing. I don't want any payment for it at all, but you can own the red dragon. And so Cadwallader took it and placed it on his standard, which of course was white and green. And so our flag was born here in Wales. And if you go out tonight, you will be able to see the dragon standing pretty proud over there in the northwest. Now, let's come out a little bit here. There's quite a lot of different tails all over the sky. Let me just see if I can get rid of all this. Okay. And one of them from North Wales commemorates a long, sinuous constellation that we can see here. It's below the bow, or Leo the lion. There's a very faint constellation here called Sextans, the sextant. It's not an ancient constellation for the simple reason that there were no navigational aids all those years back. Now this is the air pump, Pisces, the compass just there. That and that are introduced constellations that we've kept. They were put there in the 18th century by Nicholas de Lacey and several other different observers. So we can ignore them for now, because this one is a very old one, Hydra, the water snake. Of course, in Greek mythology, Hydra was one of the Lernaean Hydra was one of the 12 labors of Hercules. And well, it was a labour in Welsh mythology as well, for the simple reason this is the gwibwr, or the monster snake of Penmachno, the village up in North Wales. And the villagers were disturbed by this monster that lived in the rivers and ponds around there. For many years, it would leap out and bite the men and poison them. It would, you know, with its coils, take women down into the water, and it would generally sort of just be a nuisance for itself. And although the villagers had come out and tried to battle it, they just were no match. So they wanted a champion. And one day, along come their champion, a young man called Owain. And Owain had just come from the Crusades. And so he thought he knew a bit about fighting. So he had heard of this fabulous monster, and he thought, well, I didn't make much of a name for myself in the Crusades, but I'm going to kill this monster. I'll make a name for myself. So off he went and saw the reeve of the village, the headman. And the headman said, well, I'm glad you come along. If you think you can kill it, that would be great. But I tell you what you need to do. Go and see the oldest man. He's a bit of a sage and a wise man. See what he's got to say, see if he's got any tips for you. So Owain went off to see this man, and he sat there, and the old man came out of his hut. And he said, you're Owain, aren't you, the crusader? Yes, he said. You've come to kill the gwibwr, haven't you? Yes, said Owain. Can you help me? And the old man said, help you? No. It's going to kill you. It's going to bite you in the neck, and you'll be poisoned and dead. And Owain was a bit chastened at this, and the old man went back into his hut. And he thought, well, I wonder if the old man really, you know, has got any sort of gift of foresight at all. I tell you what I'll do. I'll come back tomorrow, and I'll be in disguise. See if he gives me the same story. See if he can see through the disguise. So this is what he does. Back he goes in disguise the next day. The old man comes out of his hut and says, are you a soldier? And I said, yes, I am. I want to kill this monster of yours. Oh, we had a young man here yesterday, but you are not going to be any better. In fact, the gwibwr is going to break your neck. And I thought, well, hang on a minute. He told me yesterday I was going to be bitten, and he hasn't recognized me, so that's a different tale. I wondered if I'd come back tomorrow and he'd tell me something different. So that's what he did, come back the next day in a different disguise. And the gwibwr said, young man, you're going to drown. It's going to drag you into the water in its coils, and you'd have had it. At that, Owain threw off his disguise and said, oh man, you know nothing about this creature at all. You have no gift of foresight. You're just useless. Get out of my way. I'm going to go and kill this animal for you. So off he went and put his armor on and got his sword and his spear all ready. I was stamping up and down the most likely spot for the gwibwr to inhabit on the river. And he was getting a bit impatient as the day was wearing on, and he let his guard down, and that was the moment the gwibwr was waiting for. It shot out of the water at great speed and bit him in the neck. And he was so stunned and surprised at the bite and the venom flowing into his veins that he staggered backwards, tripped over a tree root, smashed his helmeted head against the tree and broke his neck. And the gwibwr then put his coils around him and dragged him into the water, where he drowned. So the old man was right. Didn't matter what disguise he used, but at this point, the villagers had had enough. They were all holding back to see what the champion could do, but now they attacked the gwibwr, and the Tylwyth Teg didn't want it to be harmed in any way because it was one of their magical creatures, and so they took it and they placed it up there in the sky out of harm's way, as a warning to mortals not to mess with them as well. So the poor gwibwr of Penmachno, you can see its head there, and then its long, sinuous body starts off in winter and ends up in the summer with the tail all the way underneath part of the summer constellations. It's the longest constellation there is in the sky. And as you can see, down and down and down and down it goes anyway. Now, going back to Orion, just here is a constellation called Monocerous the Unicorn, right on the Milky Way. And it's not an easy constellation to see because it's made up of faint stars. Again, it's not an ancient constellation at all, but you can go with your binoculars all along here, and there are lots and lots of star clusters and knotty little extensions and the odd nebula to look out for as well. And it's a beautiful little constellation. It's full of all sorts of surprises. It's just a pity that there's no bright stars in it for you to hop off to go and see something. Now, just below Orion, of course, is Lepus the hare and Sirius the dog here. Dog star, Canis Major the dog. And you can see that, you know, he's almost leaping at the hare and it's trying to escape. But Lepus plays all sorts of roles in Welsh mythology because, of course, hares are all over the mountains here. They were a very good source of food. Up in Llangattoch in Brecon, there's a local legend that Richard the tailor, a man who lived in the village, could actually transform into any animal he wanted to. And he was out just wandering along, having a walk one day when the huntsman came along, and he thought, I'll transform myself into a hare and I'll outrun the hounds and see if I can get them to come into the pub. And that's exactly what he did. He outrun the hounds with all the huntsmen on his tail as well. And in the pub he went, transformed himself into Richard the tailor, sat there at the bar while the huntsmen and the hounds come bombing through the pub, you know, upsetting everybody, and they couldn't find any sign of the hare at all. So Richard had his day and he was laughing his head off. But actually, as it's St. David's Day, it actually does commemorate one of our saints as well, a young lady called Melangell. And Melangell was one of the princesses of one of the realms of Ireland, and she had come over here to bring Christianity, and then found we already had it. So she had come on a journey, and she wanted to effectively, you know, gain some spirituality. So she was there out in the wilds of the mountains in West Wales, and she began praying. And as she was praying, at the start of the day, she could hear a hullabaloo coming up over the hill, and a hare came running toward her and hid under her skirts. Hot on his heels were the hounds of the Prince Brochwel of Dyfed. And when he and the huntsman got there, they were, you know, the horses were stamping all over the place, the men were shouting, the dogs are barking, the hare was shivering under her skirts, and she just stayed there praying and keeping quiet and still. And Prince Brochwel was so impressed with her piety that he said, please keep the hare. You do whichever you want with it, but what are you doing here, maiden? And she said then that she had come looking for a place to set up a chapel and a retreat. And so he gave her a little valley down in West Wales, where Church of Melangell is still there. And it was a pilgrimage site for many, many years. So her sign became the hare. And when she died, eventually Christians then accorded her the recognition of this particular constellation up there in the sky, just under Orion, a lovely winter constellation for you to look at. Lepus contains a really, really red star, actually. So if you come from the two center bright stars here, you can see that there's a bit of a sort of trapezoid of stars here. If you go off this one, which marks the eye, about that distance, you come with your binoculars to a very, very red star called R. Leporis. And it was named by J. Hind, who was an variable star observer of the 19th century, as looking like an illuminated drop of blood. And it really is a very, very red star, one of the few red ones you can see. Betelgeuse is red, but it's more orangey to the eye than anything else and to the binoculars. But if you do manage to find R. Leporis just around there, it really is a red star, and it's well worth it. Look out for it. So I'm going to check the time a second. Oh, we've got plenty of time. So let's have a few more of these Welsh myths then, because there are plenty of them. It's just that you've got to pick your time, that's all. Now, coming up later in the night, and here where the moon is, we've got one constellation, which is a really weird shape. It's a Y-shaped constellation, which doesn't look like it here, but here are the arms of the Y. They go straight down to a star called Spica. Let's bring it up a little bit more. There we go. And you can see how bright it is there. It's the brightest one at the bottom of this Y shape. Virgo, the Virgin, is a well-known constellation, and this area here is absolutely chock full of galaxies. They are the Virgo supercluster, and they extend all the way up there. Just above Virgo, you've got a strange constellation, which binoculars brings out superbly, because it's actually a star cluster, and it's called Melot 111 or 111, entirely up to you. But this area here, look at it with binoculars, and you should be able to see about 40 stars all spread in a very large field over there. And above them are the hunting dogs, Canis venatici, or the Cwn Annwn, as they're known in Welsh. And the Cwn Annwn lived with Dridwin up at Cadair Idris. They were all part of a hunting pack together, and they would hunt people. Their job was to escort the dead into the realms of the Annwn at one time. But then the keepers of the Annwn, the Tulaiteg, didn't have much time for them because they were unruly and they weren't easy to train, and so they let them go. And because they had now lost their masters, they thought that they could do whatever they want. And so they howl in the crags all around Cadair Idris and the mountains of North Wales. And if you can hear them howling, then you know something bad is going to happen to you, because they're on your trail more than anything else. In England, they've come down through English mythology, which is part Celtic anyway, as the Black Dog. And there are lots and lots of pubs called the Black Dog, but most people don't know why. The Black Dog was an apparition that appeared whenever anybody was about to die or suffer from some sort of terrible consequence. And the Canis venatici, or the Cwn Annwn up in the sky here, are the origin of that particular myth. Now, just coming up here, we'll ignore Virgo for a minute, is a trapezoid of stars, which marks Corvus the Raven, okay, or the crow. Corvidae are the whole family. Crater, not easy to see, the cup, but Corvus, as this lovely little trapezoid of stars, is very easy. And it marks this bird. It's not just a bird. The raven itself was the sign of a king, Welsh king called Brandigedd, or Bran, the giant as he would be known. And he was the high king of Britain back in the Dark Ages. And he had a seat in what is now London. But he would go all around the country and keep an eye on things. And he was there at Harlech Castle one day when his sentries come in and said, sir, the sea is full of ships, the Irish are invading, what do we do? Well, he didn't have much of an army with him, but nevertheless they could probably hold the castle, they thought. So they girded on their armour, went to the battlements and had a look at this armada of ships, and they noticed that the ships were not landing. So he thought, well, something queer is going on. So Bran sent one of his equerries to the ships to find out what was going on. And an equerry came from the Irish king saying, look, we're fed up of fighting each other. We have heard that you have a beautiful sister, Branwen, and our Irish king, Matholwch, would love to marry her. If we get married, then we'll unite the kingdoms and we'll stop fighting each other. So Bran thought, this is a good idea. Let's get the guy in. So they brought in the Irish king, big, strapping lad, probably ex-rugby player, and gorgeous red hair. And Branwen took one look at him and went, yeah, he's pretty cool. Yes, I will marry him. So they threw a big wedding feast. And during the wedding feast, Efnesian, Bran's son, was a bit upset that his auntie was going to go away. So in a drunken state, he hamstrung 100 horses, which were part of the dowry that Bran was giving to Branwen to take away to Ireland. Well, Matholwch was incensed at this, and he wanted to kill Efnesian, but Bran put Efnesian away and said, look, you know, accept my apologies, he's an idiot, he was drunk, I will give you 1,000 white horses in recompense. And so the Irish king was mollified. Well, he took his bride and back they went to Ireland. But of course, this insult to his pride had rankled, and despite the 1,000 horses that had come after they landed, he still didn't have the same looks on them. And so he began to mistreat Bran. And despite the fact that they ended up with a little boy called Gwern after a couple of years, Bran Wen was not happy at all. And she taught a starling to speak, and then she sent the starling with a message to her brother saying that all was not well, come and rescue me. Well, Bran was incensed that the plan had all gone awry, and so he took his entire army and invaded Ireland and landed on the fields outside of Dublin to face the Irish. Now, the Irish were ready, and the Welsh and the Irish faced off and started attacking one another. And of course, the Welsh began winning the day and killing all the Irish. And then the sun went down, the moon came up, it was too dark to see on the battlefield, so the two of them called it a truce. Now, part of the dowry that had been given was this cauldron here. And this cauldron had magical powers because it had come from Arianrhod or Ceridwen, Bran's mother, the queen of the moon. And what Matholwch did was to put the body parts of his fallen soldiers into the cauldron, boil them up, and the bodies come out ready again in the morning. So it conveyed a form of immortality. Well, of course, the Welsh got up the next morning and were a bit dismayed to see the ranks full in the Irish team. And although they fought well, of course, they were being worn down. And eventually it came down to the two kings after days of fighting and the Irish army getting bigger and bigger and the Welsh were getting smaller and smaller. They didn't have the power of the cauldron. And so the two kings faced off against each other, and Branwen managed to kill Matholwch with a thrust of his sword. But as Matholwch was falling, he stabbed Bran in the leg with a poisoned blade. And so both men were doomed. Well, of course, Branwen was there trying to console her brother and was tearful. And he said, look, do me a favor. I'm going the way of my fathers. Cut my head off once it's all over and bury it in a mound in the center of our country. Keep me facing to the southwest so I can watch out for the Irish invading and my soul will look after you. This they did, and of course they carried the body back and the severed head. Unfortunately, poor Branwen died of a broken heart and was buried in Anglesey. And when they got to the center of the country, they raised a big mound over Bran's head. And eventually, William the Conqueror came here and built a castle on top of it. That castle is the White Castle in the center of the Tower of London. Look at what we've got here. Bran is a raven. That is his sign. And there are 7 ravens kept at the tower because they are the soul of Bran. And if they ever fly away, then the country will fall to invasion. So you've got something that connects the night sky and local legends throughout the country all together there, stuck in the sky. And here, of course, is the cauldron that wrought all the trouble too. Now, I'm keeping an eye on the time because I have another lecture after this as well. If we go up just here, you can use these 2 stars in the end of the plows, the pointers, because they point to the North Star there. And if I can put that around there, in very ancient Celtic times, probably sometime around the Bronze Age, there was an ancient idea about the continuity of these 3 constellations. They were not 3 different ones. This one was a woman sitting on the saddle on the back of a horse, okay? And the horse rode around the sky with this lady on his back, and it was her job to pick up the souls of the departed and escort them to the Annwn or to Bailey and Don, who were just over here, the keepers of the Arrawn or the other world, Cepheus and Don just there. Now, unfortunately, Bailey and Don noticed that there were lots of people coming to their realm, and they were used to having old people, used to having very young children, but they weren't used to people of all ages at all. So they went to find out what the heck was going on. And they cornered this lady who's never been named. We don't know what she was called. And she said, look, I have a job to do, but in the dark, my eyesight is not what it used to be. I can't see if they're alive or dead. It's easy enough to mark them out in the day and deliver them to you, but come the night when I have to check on them, or I wheel around the sky, I just can't see. So I put my hands on them as I creep into their house in the dark. And if they're breathing, I know that they're alive. But unfortunately, my touch is the kiss of death and it kills them. So I got no option but to bring them to you. So Bailey was aghast. He said, you cannot do that. You must leave them live their lives. So find another way. And so she went away and thought, I'm doing all the work. The horse is carrying me. Why doesn't it stick his head in through the doorways of the Celtic buildings and breathe on everybody inside? And once it's done that, then, his hot, smelly breath will disturb all the sleepers. And if they're not disturbed, they're probably dead. And I'll be able to take them away. And that's what she's been doing ever since, wheeling around the sky, checking on everybody's house, seeing if we're alive or dead, and taking our souls away if we are. Now, her passage and the passage of the horse obviously leaves a mark. So if you've been visited by the horse and you're disturbed by its smelly breath, you've had a visit from the nightmare, and you get bad dreams. And that's where we get that particular thing from, just looking up there in the sky. So
right, sorry. So right then, everyone, I was just saying, I'm just going to thank Martin here because I know he's got to go to another talk later. Do any of you have any questions?